UFC Kansas City goes down on Saturday night. Max Holloway held serve in the main event as the top featherweight contender, defeating Arnold Allen by unanimous decision. It continues to seem like when we talk about featherweight, it is Max Holloway, Alexander Volkanovski, and then everyone else when it comes to the hierarchy at 145 pounds. But guys, we know the deal. Holloway is 0-3 in head-to-head fights against Volkanovski, and unless the champ loses the belt, it's hard to envision Holloway getting another title shot or setting up that fourth fight. So I ask you guys, if you are Holloway, his new manager, Tim Simpson from Chosen Advisory, UFC matchmaker, Sean Shelby, UFC executive, Hunter Campbell, how do you manage Holloway's career going forward in a way that makes sense for him, for the division, all that kind of stuff? I want to go to you first.
Well, I think a lot of us were waiting for Max to have that one fight where he just starts to slow down, and he didn't really have that. He's proved that he's still top notch. So I think if I'm his manager, I got to ask him what he wants out of life at this point, right? Are you here to cash checks? If you are, the Korean Zombie's right there. That's a layup. You could take that fight. It's not like Mike said, it's the top two guys and everyone else. I don't know that that's going to challenge him so much. But if he's still hungry, if I'm Max, I go that John Jones route. I start to put some muscle on my frame. I take a little bit of time off, not John Jones time off. Don't go away that long. Take a little bit of time out and really fill into a 155 body. Because when you look at the champion, all right, I think he's 5'10". Max is 5'11". They're very, very close in reach, almost identical. You see Alexander Volkanovski, he went up and he's smaller and he gave the champ hell. All right. Now, I know Max has done this in the past, but he didn't really do it with the intentions of staying there. Right. I think if he really dedicates his body towards that 155 frame, I think he'll have some pretty good matchups to deal with. I think he'll have a new hunger for trying to maybe get that title, which is funny because you never know the way things go. He might be chasing Alexander Volkanovski again, just at another weight class. But if he stays at 145, there's just not much for him. I don't know that it really interests a guy like Max Holloway, a future Hall of Famer. So I would roll the dice and maybe try and go up in weight.
Yeah, that's a potential option. And before I ask you, Dan, about maybe if he stays at 45, I want to go off that. Holloway at 55, we have seen it obviously against Poirier, but that was very short notice. He got 3 months notice for that fight. They were trying to do Tony Ferguson in that place, and then, it didn't come together. So they went to Max against Poirier. Do you feel like he would be, if he took maybe 8 months, 10 months, a year off to build up his body? He seemed a little bigger in this fight than usual, but could he be a factor at 155? The thing that worries me is the power, right? We know that the volume is so effective, but can he go up there where he's a significant threat at 155 in terms of what his skill set can bring to the table?
Man, I'm a big Max Holloway fan, and you might be outnumbered, Mike, but like Max Holloway, I too am a Hawaiian that has love for Canada. Max, he's got love for a lot of things. He's got a big appetite, so going up in weight is in his future. He says so himself, but he does say that he wants to go up with a belt. I think it'd be better if he didn't. I think it'd be less pressure, more flexibility in matchups. But going by Max's own words, he says he doesn't want to move up there unless he has a belt. He's eyeing for a fight with Korean Zombie, which makes sense in the sense of he's in that stage of his career maybe where he's not necessarily challenging for a title since he's 0-2 to the champ. Throw him in the fun fights. Throw him against the veterans. The problem is there's not many veterans to throw him against because UFC seems to be cutting most of them. And even though you could justify Korean Zombie and Holloway from a rankings perspective, let's be honest, it feels like we're kind of just feeding, the zombie to the wood chipper. I don't hate the Tony Ferguson idea, moving up a division for fun fights. Maybe that'll kind of take that pressure off of the gold belt that Max puts on himself. They did try to make the Ferguson fight, I believe, even as early, correct me if I'm wrong, post UFC 200. Remember, it was supposed to be one of the many Khabib Fergusons, ended up being Ferguson Venata for Lando Venata's debut, but they actually tried to make a Holloway Ferguson back then. I will throw out one suggestion and I'll stop it short because this fight may come up, but I say break apart Dariush and Oliveira because I'm one of the few people who hate that fight and will gladly say why later. But one of the reasons why you could pull it apart is because Max Holloway and Charles Oliveira could be run back. It's a perfect time for both of them. They haven't fought since UFC Saskatoon, speaking of Canada, in 2015. So I would love to see that fight.
Yeah, I was at that one in Saskatoon. The strange esophagus injury that was never really confirmed, and we don't actually know what happened. That was a very strange one. But yeah, we will get to Charles Oliveira and Dariush a little later. But George, I want to ask you, what do you think of this Max Holloway Korean Zombie idea. Do you think this is a good fit for Holloway going forward? Coming off this, if you're his team, you're the UFC, do you look like as one that makes sense? I know if you see the reaction to it of Max's comments, and fair play to him, he didn't go out there demanding this. He got asked a question by a media member saying he's wanted to fight you for a long time. And Holloway, you don't genuinely see him get like that excited when another fighter's name brought up. He's like, man, I want to fight this guy for such a long time. Like, it's more about, I feel like, the legacy stuff. And he's the only guy in the top 7 I think he hasn't fought. But some of the fans seem to feel like this would almost be cruel matchmaking. Where do you sit on that line?
I feel like the fans do. It is leading a lamb to slaughter. Korean Zombie did not look great in his last fight, and I feel like he's just past his prime. I got excited about the matchup too because they're both OGs, so it's not like I'm not digging it. And maybe the UFC makes this thing happen because that would help the UFC out because there just seems to be a logjam. But look, the guys presented excellent cases, and I'm really digging Oliveira versus Holloway. Great job, Dan Tom. However, I also think there's another way to approach this. First, let's let the fight happen in July, where Yair fights Volkanovski. We may no longer have Volkanovski at the top of the division after that fight. I don't think that's the case, but it's a possibility. Anything can happen. Alexa Grasso, hello, right? But so many things can happen, man. Maybe Volkanovski wins and says sayonara to the featherweight division and just says, I'm now going to apply myself here. You guys battle it out down there. I mean, look at Alex Tejeda. He recently said, I'm moving up. I won the title. I'm 1-1 overall with Izzy. 3-1 if you want to count kickboxing. We can always revisit, but for now, my focus is here. Volkanovski could always return. Who knows? So I think time has shown us, and covering the sport has shown us, all of us have covered the sport at least a decade, that so many things can happen. And so to overthink it is too much. However, the one thing that a lot of fighters used to crap on in the past, and really they need to take a good look at, is look at those opportunities to become an interim champ, because it gets you to the front of the line. You don't have to be the backup or nothing like that. And guess what? Pay-per-view points. So like Goz was saying earlier, what drives you? What motivates you? The money, the belt. Let's start answering those questions and figuring things out. So no, I really don't want to see Zombie against Max. I just think Max is too good. It would really, I don't think it would be competitive at all. Sorry, TKZ. I love you. I had your original t-shirt back in the day. But yeah, I don't like that matchup at all. Just hang out, wait, see what happens in July, and then let's see how things play out. Now, look, there is a possibility that Volkanovski loses and says, I want to run it back. And he would get that instant equity because of all the title defenses he's had, and he's a constant defender of his title, so he'd probably get there. But what if he's not ready to go? Then maybe that's where Max slips in. Who knows? Remember, Jose Aldo didn't get a rematch against Conor as well. He got clipped. Maybe it's one of those situations. So many things can happen.
Yeah, I think you laid it out pretty well there. It is tricky though, right? I think the Korean Zombie fight, in a sense, would work because it's unlike this Arnold Allen situation where you're not killing off a guy who's a potential title-ready contender and a fresh name and all that stuff. So, and the UFC did try to do this fight before. I think it was briefly discussed when they were trying to have that South Korea event that ultimately ended up falling apart, and they did the road to the UFC finals in Las Vegas. So there is some history between these two. It's just, yeah, do you feel like it's the right move for Max? And a lot obviously depends, as you said, George, on the July title fight. If Volkanovski wins, does he go up and try to fully commit to that rematch with Makhachev and trying to pursue that? If he loses, do they give him an immediate rematch, which hurts Holloway's timeline and stuff too? So there's a lot going on here in terms of like how all the pieces come together. And I think it all depends on what happens in July during International Fight Week. But on the flip side of this coin, to kind of close out topic one here, Arnold Allen, he did lose this fight. He was 10-0 in the UFC coming in here. And obviously this was his big step up. This was his moment to guarantee his title shot, all that kind of stuff. Didn't get the win, but I think he performed valiantly in there against Max. Dan Tom, what did you think of Arnold Allen's performance? How do you assess it in a losing effort?
Yeah, I think he did fine from what I saw going through the distance there. I just was happy that what I just said, we got to see him go through the distance. We never got to see Allen in a 5-round fight. He's only been scheduled for one, and that includes his entirety of his career, not just his UFC. So being able to get that, we had the unfortunate ending with the Calvin Kattar fight. But this, we got much more of Allen, even in multiple stances, because Max will switch stance. He did a lot of southpaw, which we haven't really gotten to see Allen in kind of southpaw versus southpaw matchup, which gets my brain thinking. But I think Allen should hold his head up high. Even Max said so himself. He said, "I wouldn't be surprised if we see each other again." I'm not sure about that with the way the timelines might shake out, but absolutely, Allen is a competitor in this division, and I hope he doesn't go down too far. I hope he kind of gets the rub even from a loss, so to speak.
Agreed. Yeah, I said in my post-fight matchmaker piece that I'd like to see Arnold Allen fight Brian Ortega next. I think that would be a very logical fight for the division. Goes, I saw your reaction there. What do you think of that fight?
Yeah, I like that, man. I mean, Allen proved that he deserves to be here, and he just happens to be around at a time where the top two dogs are future Hall of Famers. It's a bump in the road, but I expect them to make adjustments and make another push again. I mean, the dude, the way he was throwing power shots from odd angles. I mean, how often do we ever see Max Holloway really busted up like that? I thought Arnold Allen did about just as good as you can in a loss, and I hope to see him soon.
Agreed. Yeah, George, anything else to chime in before we move on?
He showed so much heart because he came out in the 5th round, and I mean, he was as dangerous as he was in the 1st round. He was throwing hard, so he knows he can go 25 minutes. He knows he's not going to give up, and he did it against one of the best to ever do it at 145 pounds. So there's a lot to build on here for Arnold Allen, man. Lots of respect. You know, a couple of those shots, man, towards the end, some of those that kind of clipped you on the side, doesn't have to be score on the job, man. These are 4-ounce gloves, and anything can happen. When they were throwing down, I was like, oh, wow, man, Max might make a fatal mistake here. But, you know, if anything, Max is a G. He was the one that clipped him at the end and dropped him. But all kinds of respect for Arnold Allen. There's lots to build on.
For sure. And just before we move on, a couple notes here on Max Holloway in terms of what he achieved with this performance here. Joins the 20-win club, the 12th fighter in UFC history to reach 20 octagon wins. He had his 15th UFC performance of at least 100 significant strikes landed. No other fighter in UFC history has 8 such performances. So that goes to show how ridiculous his volume is consistently. First fighter to cross 3,000 significant strikes landed in a UFC career, and has now completed 27 UFC fights without being knocked down, which is also the most in UFC history. So Max Holloway continues to be a legend of the sport. And we saw it once again on Saturday night. But
3,000 significant strikes he's landed, and he's never even been knocked down?
So he's landed 3,122 significant strikes landed. He's absorbed 2,088 and not been knocked down. Obviously, a bit of a concerning number with the latter there, but
wow.
He takes it unlike anyone else. So phenomenal stuff. Dan, were you going to say something? I think you're muted there, Dan.
All right. Is BJ Penn still top 3 as far as never knocked down? Because I remember he had it for a while. Ironic, another Hawaiian has it now.
Yeah, he had the record for the longest time, and then it got broke by Yair Rodriguez, and then Max Holloway took it, and the person behind him is John Jones. So who I believe John Jones has like 24 or 25 UFC fights at this point. So
that's
pretty remarkable. We got some of the all-time greats.